Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Myers with Ishmael Interactive. Thank you for joining us in another of our speaker series. Today, I'm here with Mark. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Hey Aaron, great to see you again. I'm Mark Vogelgesang. I am currently a product manager at Salesforce, and my background is within public service and government contracting, where I worked with a number of different agencies and with Aaron at GSA in a prior life.
Excellent. So, Mark, we got you on here more to talk about product management at large and sort of your philosophy and your take on how you tackle work. Of course, I want to say up front, sort of the obligatory, you don't speak for Salesforce. You're not from the PR office. Let's just talk more about our approaches to work.
Sounds great.
Product management is one of those phrases or terms that I think a lot of people hear of, but if they're not directly involved with the development of an application, maybe they don't have the most accurate idea of what it is. What is your layman's term product management?
I would say product management is the overall responsibility for a given discrete set of features within an application or a larger product. This could be as discrete as owning the design system for that's used across a given product. It could be as broad as managing, say, integration platforms and how third parties interact with the platform. The size, I think, is less important than or the overall scope of the project is, I think, less important, but the focus area is, I think, where it really centers.
So I want to nail in on some issues or problems that you've had in the past that might be universal to a lot of our audience. And you have and do work on some doozies with a large variety of people with requirements and needs and wants that can go from the intern level to the C-suite. What do you do when you have a product with requirements and needs and functions that are desired, but the variety of person and therefore the variety of need and want is just a mile long? One
I
product,
think
many
that,
masters.
yeah, I think just kind of two things. One is as a product manager, you you have a lot of autonomy to pick and choose. Obviously, you need to work up through your management chain and the organization that you're in, but um, there's a lot of autonomy to say, we will or will not work on something. When thinking much more broadly about requirements that come down from on high, I think that gets to alignment. Is there organizational alignment that we should be taking on a certain scope for the product that you work in? If it's just very, it's coming down and you don't have the necessary alignment from other organizations that might need that feature, or they might be depending on it, it becomes really easy then to say this isn't necessary, and you can kind of explicitly explain why. But if you have that alignment, I think it becomes a lot easier to understand the necessity of it and the prioritization of it.
Okay, so hardest thing in the world for many people to do, including people who are in our organization, is saying no. You get a requirement, it's not alignment, you don't have the buy-in, or somebody else needs something that completely overrides it and it comes down from on high. Do you deliver the no? Does somebody else? What is your strategy for we can't really do that?
I think it comes in different forms. If it's an individualized request, say by a colleague or a peer, you can explain like, look, like the room for prioritization is just not there. It might be a valuable feature. It might be something that can go onto the backlog. It might not even be well articulated, and for that reason, you need to say no. When it comes to requests that come down from the top, I think it becomes a discussion of trade-offs of, hey, we've also prioritized this list of work, and what do we need to move around to make this happen? Because you never want to be in a position where you're just getting inundated with more and more work that's all high priority. That doesn't serve anyone well. You're not going to be able to actually produce anything as a result.
Now, in the past, you've worked with some design systems, some developer tools, things like that. And I'm just wondering because you're working with things that creators are utilizing to make other things, how do you front load sort of the flexibility of future functions or future requirements, sort of being future agnostic? How much does that play into what you're doing?
I think especially when considering like design systems or open source projects, um, you want to be in a position where others can extend your work or build upon it. You're never going to have the capacity to build all of the necessary features for everyone that uses the product. But if you can provide the tooling and the extension points necessary so that people can either compose solutions with your project or your product, um, or even build upon them. I think that's where you end up getting it to a place where overall your product accelerates, even if you're not necessarily the one putting out each and every feature, your team.
So you do mention that sometimes the requirement comes to you and it's not particularly well articulated. I think that won't shock anybody. That's part of, working in modern day life. Um, and what this does raise to my mind, and once again, I'm talking to you, Mark, the technologist, not any more specific than that, the AI of it all. And something that I see often is that the barrier to using AI is much lower than the barrier to understanding AI. Way easier to use it than it is to understand it. And one of those issues is, did I articulate my prompt in a way that makes sense? Or did I articulate constructing an agent in a way that actually solves the problem that I think it's solving? Do you have an approach to AI tools to see if the requirement that you've constructed or that you're putting together gives you what you want?
I would say so. I find I use AI in two contexts fairly frequently. One is for coding and development tasks and being able to give a set of instructions to an AI and say, hey, I'd like you to build this in Node. Here's my end goals and operating from that perspective. And then also the second area is in writing and either taking a bulleted list of points that I want to make and saying, hey, can you help me kind of construct this into a better narrative? Or having it serve as like an editor or a peer reviewer of something that has been written. And I think in either case you can, or I've benefited from asking the AI to be very, very critical of what's been produced. It might be come through with a first pass that produces a paragraph or produces a set of code. And then I might prompt it again and say, give this a critical view, take a critical view at this. What needs to be changed? What isn't clear? What might be ambiguous about what has been written, either in a literal sense or in a coding sense. And I find that using AI as a peer reviewer, sometimes even for itself, is really beneficial. Or being able to take, specifically when writing papers and things, be able to take a given paragraph and describing, hey, this feels to me that it is not, landing the punch that I wanted it to land. It's not having the impact that I'm hoping for. How might this be revised? And I think those are areas where you can be a little ambiguous and have the AI provide you different options that maybe you can take pieces from each of the options that it provides and derive something better than what you had started with.
I like that. I don't often hear people using AI to cross-check itself. Probably needs to happen more often. Probably going to borrow that, but other than that, just iterate, iterate, iterate. Now,
Or even saying, hey, I thought this was a great point that was made. What's a source that I should be citing to make such a point? And sometimes it will come up with some very interesting results. Other times it might say like it kind of it just flounders a little bit. But I think those are areas where like if you're not sure of a fact that has been presented, really interrogating the AI to see, well, where did this come from? Like why should I be saying it in this way?
Right. So one thing that made me think of you while doing my own work is I started training my own models to get some stuff done to better capture certain voices or narrative lines. And at a certain point, the more I trained it, the longer the responses got. Not better quality, just longer. And I sat back and I used a Markism. I said, "That's a smell." And it's a phrase you used to use, which was, "I don't know exactly what's wrong, but if this is happening, something's wrong." So do you have, when you're working in this or even in product management, if we want to go one level more general, uh, smells that you run into or things that you might not know what is wrong, but if somebody's running into this, maybe they should double down and take another look.
I think one smell that I can kind of readily think of is when a given when you're talking about a given product, maybe fits into a suite of other products, and as you're reading through it, it just seems to be very misaligned or trying to really reinvent the wheel compared to everything else around it. And sometimes it can be rather hard to pinpoint why it feels very different, or why all these new structures need to be invented to support this very unique need, when in fact, the larger product around it probably does that thing just fine. There might just be a lack of awareness. And I think that's an area where at times when it kind of looking at different products and trying to understand like what are the real goals here? Why is this process or why is this thing being invented? Sometimes it's just a case of like there's just not an understanding of what else is already out there that they could tap into. And sometimes it feels a lot more fun to greenfield something than to pick up things that have already been produced. So I think that's one smell that, if you are working within a product of products, um, the necessity to greenfield is not always there. And if something comes through that has a lot of, it's really disrupting everything. I think that can sometimes be a smell.
I think one of the things that reminds me of is sort of these office productivity suites where you run into things like convert to table in a spreadsheet program, and the word processor has already a much easier or easy to use one. If I'm sort of understanding your point, how sometimes when you have an umbrella of products, you get to a point where you want a greenfield, so you're trying to make each one do everything that all of them do.
Potentially. I think sometimes also the intent of why a feature was created is not always well articulated via the release notes, or the explanation of like, hey, here's this new feature that we came out with called convert to table. And I think sometimes that why gets lost and it can feel very superfluous. Whereas there might be like very valid reasons and very real problems that they saw within the product to require it.
True. I mean, if we have one of those products that's built for many, many people, the possibility is that just wasn't built for me. And because it
Very true.
wasn't, I don't know, because it wasn't, I don't know why, what the thing is. But I
That's right. And
suppose that's another danger of product management when you have a very diverse and large user base.
That's right. And if you looked at a word processing application, yes, you might have a lot of people that use it, but they're not all of the word processing persona necessarily. Like there's these sub personas, these subgenres that you need to understand in a really deep way. And they might only use very small portions of the feature set, but for the features that they do use, they're very impactful.
So, Mark, we've talked a bit about the product management philosophy and approach to that and some of the common problems. Let's work our way back into the AI of it all, since it is an industry juggernaut right now. Once again, this is talking to Mark, the technologist, the person who's watching the industry. In my own research and my own taking of classes, I did some stuff at a few schools that really took the approach of the development's history. It was big when the corpus reached a trillion bits of information. That's when you started to be able to put sentences together. it was big when you started to do this or that or whatnot. What are the next big either milestones or applications that you're looking at where you could say, oh, hey, this thing's really reaching its potential?
I think this is most readily apparent today in code editors, and I think its extension into more everyday life will be getting there. But in in a code editor, I might be given a set of instructions. I might give the LLM a set of instructions, and it has a series of model context protocol servers that it can connect to. So it can handle things like GitHub. It can handle pulling in data. It can handle a whole variety of tasks, and it knows how to utilize those services. So when I prompt it and I say, "Hey, I'd like to build something," it can construct an entire list of requirements that this thing must meet in order for it to work. And it's not just the instructions I gave it, but does it properly compile? Does it deploy successfully? Is the code formatted in a way that works? Can I write a commit that message that makes sense? Can I commit it? Can I push it into a pipeline? Those are all things that the LLMs and a lot of the models today are quite good at. They will kind of iterate over that again and again and again, because when you type in npm run start, for instance, it either started or it didn't.
Right.
When you run the tests, they either pass or they don't. It's very objective, and I think that's an area where when I think back to when I first started using kind of agents to do development, it didn't quite have that full tool chain to reevaluate itself and just keep thinking and keep trying, just as you would if you were coding everything from scratch and you didn't have an agent. But it also does it in a much more robust way. It's going to try a lot more things. It's going to save state and come back to it better. And I think that's an area where improving that tool chain for kind of everyday functions beyond just a development task would start to get really, really powerful.
Yeah, I think the save state and come back to it is extremely key. I'm going from my own experience getting into vibe coding lately, like everybody else, and trying to put things together. And I just did a thing where I was using it to put together Python to better parse federal business opportunities, which gets really confusing because if you ask 10 people to describe a web application, they're going to do it 10 different ways, especially in the federal marketplace. So, how do you search for that? Uh, and just doing small tweaks on the language model to better pick up which words are actually talking about the same thing, giving it opinions of, well, the output felt this way, or this was not specific enough. So it was very still human in the loop, at least on the level that I'm operating currently.
Yeah,
That's
and
your experience?
to a degree, but I was going to say, thinking about the federal procurement space, I remember a number of times where we would write a requirement that went out into a contract, and the contracting officer, because they're not necessarily technologists, they wouldn't realize that a vendor provided basically a synonym for that exact same thing,
Yeah.
and they would say, "Oh, this is disqualified." And instead, I think there's a lot of power in LLMs to help kind of walk through some of those things to say, hey, this did meet the scope, even though the term wasn't explicitly used. And I think there's a degree of education to be had there.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the matching of opportunity to solution is going to be hopefully better in the future because of it. If people keep iterating and getting better on their uses of the tools. Um, but I guess in that case, we could call government value and matching contract to contract op a smell. Just to go back to our
Certainly.
previous terminology. Yeah, absolutely. So, Mark, at this point, I'd like to thank you for joining us and for having a brief discussion with us. What do you got going on in the future? What are you into?
I'm reading a book currently called Range, and it's all about kind of taking a diversified set of experiences to help kind of produce better outcomes. And it cites a lot of different examples, and it kind of also pushes back against some of this ideology of like you must start your kids young to become experts at all of these different fields
Well,
and sports. And while there's certainly arguments to be made for like chess and golf, there are a lot of other examples where you don't need to be playing. Federer didn't seriously play tennis till he was like 14. And he became the best tennis player. And how kind of having this range of interests and allows people to make kind of larger leaps within their fields or tangential fields because they can kind of pull ideas from across different disciplines. And it's a book that very much resonates to me as a father of a kindergartner, but also as somebody who went to a liberal arts college, where you were constantly doing that interdisciplinary activity. And I think that's an area where, as I look at my work and the things that excite me, it's always in that space, kind of in between disciplines. Like
I like
how do you
that.
pull it together? And so yeah, that's been one that I've really been enjoying recently.
That really hits me in the fatherhood. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
From us here at Ishmael Interactive, we will talk to you again soon.